Well, thank you for joining us for the Benton Franklin Recovery Coalition Addiction Forum tonight. My name is Jan Gerlitz, and I'm the chair of the Public Information Committee and a family advocate. You may be here tonight because there is someone in your family struggling with addiction, or perhaps you are here because you're in recovery and want to help others. But for whatever the reason, we're pleased that you're here to learn more about the coalition, the addiction crisis in our community, and how you can help those who suffer from substance use disorders. The Benton Franklin Coalition is a nonprofit group that aims to improve opportunities for recovery from substance use disorder and remove barriers to recovery in Benton and Franklin counties. We also want to take away the stigma and the shame that's always surrounded addiction and talk about it as the disease that it is. Open dialogue can always improve things. Tonight, you're going to hear from some concerned citizens who volunteer their time and their expertise to our coalition over the past several months. They're going to speak on the effects that substance use disorders have on our community. We realize you're here because you may have concerns or questions. So at the end of our program, we're going to have a question and answer time. On your chair, you should have a 3x5 card. During our speakers, if you'd like to write a question specifically for a speaker or just a general question to anyone on our panel, we'll have someone from our group pick them up at the end. And if you need cards or pencil right now, just raise your hand. Danny has some here for you. Before we begin, I wanted to introduce the elected officials we have in our audience tonight. If you could stand when I read your name. Jerome Delvin, Benton County Commissioner. Thank you for coming. Phil Limley, Richland City Councilman. Thank you. And Sean Sant, Franklin County Prosecutor. Have I missed any elected officials? We certainly appreciate you coming out tonight. Okay, well, without further ado, we'll go ahead and start our panel. Our first speaker is Jamie Curtis. She's the Executive Director of Somerset Counseling Center.
All right, thank you. So my name is Jamie Carson. I am the Executive Director at Somerset Counseling Center in Richland. I am also a member of the Recovery Coalition because community outreach is one of my favorite things. I love the Tri-Cities, it's my adopted home, and I've been working in the behavioral health field for about 14 years now, and this is what I love to do. So I've been doing a few speaking engagements lately and a few trainings, and the question that comes up over and over again is, what exactly does it mean that we're in an opiate epidemic, and what does that mean for our region? Because a lot of people are seeing the really scary news and all the headlines and all the horror stories, and they don't really know what that means in real life and how that's impacting our community and what we're doing about it. So one thing I want to start off with is just this idea of thinking of how big and vast our country is. And if substance use disorder was a state in the United States, its population would be the 4th largest state in the US. That's an epidemic. Whether it's opiate specific, alcohol specific, the crack cocaine epidemic of the 80s, the substance really is just indicative of an ongoing addiction crisis we've had in our country for generations. So I want to thank, in case anybody here from Accountable Communities of Health, for their help in getting some data, because I will be honest with you, I'm a counselor, and I'm now a treatment administrator, and I am not great with numbers. And I had to really get some community partners on board to help me, because one of the first things that people ask at training and educational evenings is, give me some numbers, show me what that means. So thinking about, again, how big our region is, I don't want to bore you with too many numbers, so I'm going to flip through to the good ones. Would you expect there to be more opiate-related overdose deaths in Benton and Franklin County or Yakima? Benton, Franklin. So we always kind of think of things in terms of relation to the greater population, right? And Yakima, as a metropolitan area, has a greater population than the Tri-Cities area, but we're facing more fatalities. And so right there is kind of one of those indicators that this is something that's considered an epidemic, because people are dying. And our goal as providers and as the Recovery Coalition is to keep people alive long enough to get them into the care, housing, and programs that they need. And part of getting that to happen is getting all the right people to understand just how big of an issue this is. So when we look at the fatalities in the Tri-Cities, some of that is tied to specific opiate use, like prescription medications. It could include heroin, it could include fentanyl, it could include oxys. And we know that there's been an increase in opiate-related deaths over the last 2 years. But I just really want to stress that we have an addiction crisis in the United States. And I know that's not a very popular point of view right now, because there's specific legislation and funding and things happening that's specific to opiates. But remember, I'm a counselor first, and I've been in the field 14 years, and I can tell you right now we have an addiction crisis. And the more we put blinders on and only talk about one substance at a time, the more the disease of addiction starts taking over. Because as we've all been watching the opiate crisis, meth-related overdoses have been steadily climbing since last year. And so I just really want to have that balanced view between educating our public to the fact that yes, we have a particular epidemic in our country and in our region, but we really can't put those blinders on and focus on one thing at a time. We really have to focus on substance use disorders as a whole if we're going to help people get well. Part of the issue with data collection, because I had so much data given to me by Accountable Communities of Health, which was fantastic, but the problem is we don't really know the full scope of the opiate-related crisis in our region, because there's no data collection for near misses. Anybody ever work at Hanford around here? Gotta love the near miss, it counts. It counts against you. So we don't have any data collection for near fatalities. We don't have any data collection for how many people were given Narcan and revived. Just like we don't have any data collection for how many people had alcohol poisoning that was almost fatal and they had their stomach pumps and survived. So all we know is when it ends in death. And by then it's too late. And so what I really want to focus on is getting kind of away from the numbers, because they don't really tell us the whole story, and focus on the people that are actually struggling with addiction and how that impacts our community. And that can impact our community in a lot of ways. Overusing the emergency room. It can impact our community because they're struggling with parenting, and that increases caseloads for our community partners like CPS workers. And it impacts our community at the schools because kids are coming in not as well cared for as they could be, and then that puts the burden on the school system. And addiction impacts so many people in so many ways beyond just the addict themselves. It impacts family, it impacts divorce rates, it impacts all kinds of things. It impacts our community in terms of drunk driving and driving under the influence of drugs. It impacts the ability for people to hold down jobs, which then can impact the people that work with that addict. And so it's just one of those insidious diseases that touches everyone that's connected to the addict. And so our goal within, not just within my treatment agency, but within the Recovery Coalition is, what can we do about it? We all know that it's a difficult disease to treat, but that doesn't mean that we can't do something. And so part of what we're doing is conversations like this out in our community with people who live here, work here, people who might have family members or friends that are struggling. We want you to see the faces of people like myself and my partners that are part of community programs that are doing their best to fight addiction. We want to have face-to-face conversations, agency to agency. I know myself and other entities will go into our community partners and provide trainings. I just did a couple training series for Pasco Police Department, which was a lot of fun. And so I think it's just important to have an ongoing conversation about addiction, because it is still a highly stigmatized disease. It's really easy to want to cut people off because they're making poor choices, especially when those poor choices cost a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of productivity and increase insurance rates. Oh yeah, all kinds of things. And so it's so easy to want to just cut people out and say, you know, let them deal with their problem on their own. But the reality is you're dealing with a human being who has a brain disease that manifests itself in inappropriate coping skills. And that means their symptoms are not the problem. The problem is happening internally. But man, those symptoms are hard to deal with. The lying, the cheating, the stealing, the can't show up to work on time, can't, you know, they're so hard to love, but oh my goodness, I love them. And so I think it's just really important that we remember that no matter how you're coming into contact with people struggling with addiction, whether you're their arresting officer or their probation officer, or you're a parent that's struggling with your relationship, just remembering that they still have that humanity. And even though addiction takes over lives, it will never fully take over their humanity. They're people, and they need help. And we're trying to do our best to build up our systems in the Tri-Cities so that we're getting people into treatment more quickly, more efficiently, that we're not having that burden on emergency rooms, we're not having that burden on other care providers. We're helping them get connected with housing and other referral sources so that we're getting their needs met, and helping them to become more productive so that those symptoms we talked about earlier that are so hard to love, we're trying to get those under control. And that's, I think, going to be the most important part of any of the further conversations we have tonight, because we do have some really exciting things happening in our area. We've got some exciting programs in our jail. Whoever would have thought that a program in jail would be something super exciting to talk about or would have a lot to do with recovery, right? Because we can't incarcerate the addiction out of someone, but man, that incarceration can be the first step to getting people back into their lives, making good choices, making reparations. And if we can get them stable at any point of contact, then that's what we want to do. And sometimes that first point of contact is things like tonight. I mean, just sitting here thinking how many of you came in the door just because it's the Tri-Cities and it's a Thursday night and there's not a whole lot going on. But also maybe because you know someone who's struggling. Maybe you yourself have struggled with addiction and you wanted to be a support. Maybe you have someone in your life who is having a difficult time. Maybe you work at a facility or a church or a program and you just want to know more about what's happening around here. But either way, something pulled you in here tonight to have a conversation about recovery, and I'm just so excited that you came. So I know I didn't go quite through all my time, but we started late, so I was hoping to leave some extra minutes for everybody else. So I just want to say thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jamie. Our second speaker is Christine Stacy. I'm the Outreach Navigator for the Oxford House.
Hi, I'm Christine, and I'm a woman in long-term recovery, which means to me is I haven't needed to use a drink or a drug since October 15th, 2013. They asked me to talk about my addiction and recovery story, and they only gave me 10 minutes. So we'll see how that works. I started using when I was 14 years old. Was addicted to cocaine by the time I was 17, and addicted to meth and pregnant with my first child by the time I was 18. Landed my first treatment center when I was 19. Michael was 10 months old. Stayed clean about maybe a year after that, and then decided it was a good idea to start getting loaded again. Some people say that traumatic childhoods have to do with your addiction. I didn't have that. I didn't have a traumatic childhood. I had an amazing family. I still do. My parents are still married, just celebrated 49 years of marriage. I decided to continue to get loaded. When Michael was 4, he was taken from me by CPS, which forced me to go back to treatment and go through and graduate drug court. which I ended up staying clean 1 week shy of 4 years after being in drug court. Then I found opiates. I had no idea what they were. I had gotten into a car accident and been prescribed opiates. And that went into about a 6-year opiate addiction along through my pregnancy with my second child. I used opiates through my whole second pregnancy, which ended up with an opiate-addicted child when she was born, and a whole lot of other medical problems when I had my daughter. It wasn't long after that that I decided that I didn't want to stay with my family. I wanted to go out and run the streets in my addiction, so I left both of my children and my husband, and I left. And I did that I ran for about 3.5 years. And then October 15th, 2013, the Benton County Sheriff's decided it was time to change my life, and I got arrested. And I can still remember the arresting officer, looking at me and looking at my record, which this would have been the 21st time I had been arrested in Benton and Franklin counties. And he looked at me, he said, "Christine, you don't look like a drug addict. You don't look like you belong out here. And I really hope that, this can, help you do something different." Well, by the time I went to jail, I hadn't seen my children for 3.5 years. My mom always looked on the jail roster because she knew if I was in jail, I was safe. And I don't know if she had told my ex-husband that I was in jail, but I was in there over Halloween, Thanksgiving, and then Christmas rolls around. And all of a sudden I get a Christmas card from my children. And of course there's always drugs inside the jail, and there was dope in my pod. And they had sent me pictures of my son and daughter, and I had that choice. And I chose not to use them. And it was my very first time that I made the right choice. A girl in there suggested something about getting on the jail release program. I didn't know what that was. And she said, "Well, if you want to stay clean when you get out, you sign up for the jail release program, and they'll help you pay to get into an Oxford house." Okay, well, I'll give it a shot. So I did, and the lady came in to see me. It was almost the end of the year. She told me there were 19 applications in for the jail release, and they had 2 spots open. So I gave her my application and asked, and I was getting out on my birthday on December 31st. She said, "Give us a call January 2nd, and we'll let you know if you got it." I called, and I got in. I don't know why, but I did. She says, "You need to find an Oxford house, and you need, move in, and we'll get you started." Well, from then, I moved into the Oxford house, got immediately, I started service work maybe 2 months after I moved into the house. And then I kind of just dove right in. I was a fundraiser for Oxford House. I was secretary, chapter chair, moved up to the state position. And then it came time to take custody of my son, which I couldn't do in an Oxford house because he was too old. So I ended up moving out on my own. I got custody of Michael. And then by that time I had been offered a job with Oxford House to run the new funding program for Oxford House applicants, which it was pretty a godsend to me because now I get to facilitate a funding program that helped me when I very first got clean. And today, I still do that today. I am also full-time outreach for Oxford House Incorporated. And my son lives with me. I now foster another child whose mother died of her addiction about 2.5 years ago. And then my 11-year-old daughter, she does live with her dad, but I see her all the time. So it's pretty amazing to just stand up here and be that person that got it. And be able to maybe be a voice for a person who doesn't think they can get it, because they can. I don't really know what else to say other than the fact that I'm blessed, and thank you for letting me share my story.
Thank you, Christine. Okay, next I'd like to welcome Benton County Sheriff Jerry Hatcher to the podium. He's going to tell us all about some new law enforcement programs in our community.
I'd like to start off by thanking everybody for being here tonight, thanking Bethel Church for hosting us, and a special thank you to you. You started this coalition, and without this coalition, I'm not sure where we'd be in this fight against the opiate addiction that we're seeing out here. She single-handedly has brought together a very comprehensive group of experts to include all law enforcement in the area, prosecutors' offices, medical treatment, housing, and she started in her backyard with just a group of friends. So thank you very much, Michelle. I'm going to talk about a couple different projects that we have going that we're pretty excited about. The first one will be our MAP program, and the second one will be a potential detox facility that we're going to be working on, hopefully. But before I start with that, I want to give you a little bit of background. I'm sorry. Sheriff Raymond's here with me. He's making me speak because he's bigger than me. But when you fill out the cards for the questions, they all get directed to him. So, for us in law enforcement, the opiate epidemic is very significant and challenging. We started to see a significant rise in the people coming into our jail who were extremely sick and using opiates. This was very alarming to us. Currently, I have about 25% of my inmate population that is come in under the addiction of opiates, which is very alarming to me because it's very labor intensive, and we're a jail. We're not a detox facility or a medical facility that's designed to handle that type of individual. Unfortunately, as I look across this state, jails and emergency rooms are becoming the de facto mental health and opiate crisis. I won't say dumping ground, but I'll just say that that's where they end up being. And it's really sad for us to see because we got into law enforcement to fight crime, and mental health and drug addiction and all that, unfortunately, is a byproduct of that, but there's better ways to handle this, and I hope you see by the time we're done here tonight that there's some exciting programs that will help us get away from that model. And as sheriffs, we clearly understand that we can't incarcerate our way out of this opiate addiction. I learned a long time ago when we started drug court and worked through that. I was amazed when you bring in treatment and you couple experts in the community from treatment, recovery, and medical in with incarceration, what we can do together. And we're running about 69% success rate in drug court, and that is phenomenal. To think people that use every day are able to get off drugs and never come back into the system. 69%, so almost 7 out of 10 never come back into the criminal justice system. And so from a humanistic standpoint, that is incredible, but also from a law enforcement standpoint, I can tell you that there's nothing we do that rivals those kind of numbers. That is nothing short of just awesome success. So I commend the drug courts for what they're doing, and hopefully we'll be doing some of the same things. The challenge for us as we look at this opiate crisis is we're trying to find a way to maintain accountability as sheriffs, along with finding a path to treatment, because we look at the recidivism rates, we understand what it costs the taxpayers to house them, and we realize that it's just a revolving door. We see the same faces, the same names, and all this. So we're trying to find a different model, and the first thing that we did recently is Jeff still here? Dr. Jeff, is he still here? I know he's here somewhere. There he is back there. We started the MAP program in both of our jails. We received a grant, but we had already been working on a kind of path to detoxifying these individuals, because the problem for us in jails is sometimes the community services are there, but we can't get them there because they have to have a clean UA, they have to be sober and all this, and that just doesn't happen in that world. And so unless we can get them in and stabilize them, we can't get them into these services, and we lose beds and everything, and it's very competitive out there. So we are able to start partnering and look across this community and say, who's our partners out here besides the coalition? And Dr. Jeff with Ideal Options is here. If you don't mind, stand up, Jeff, because without this man, I couldn't do what I'm doing. So together, we started, we call the MAP program, and that's medication-assisted treatment. And basically, when somebody comes through the jail doors, we do a lot of exhaustive things now. We do a complete medical and mental health screening on every single person. I do it within the first 2 hours that they're there, which beats the standards anywhere in the state, which is 48 hours. And I do that because the people that come in are extremely sick. And I've learned from when I've watched the deaths that have occurred and stuff, if somebody goes upstairs and decides to take their life, it's extremely difficult for us to do it. But when they're downstairs, when they first come in and they don't always tell us the truth and stuff, it's important that we do medical screenings with them. I UA every single person so that I can see what's on board. And now we have an imaging system so I can see what they've ingested because, as she said, they bring dope into the jail, or they try to. And it's extremely hard for them to do that now, so we've cut down a lot on that. But this MAP program is medication-assisted treatment, and basically what it allows us to do is when we see somebody that comes in that has an opiate addiction, we immediately put them on this protocol, and we're able to bring them down or detoxify them or stabilize them in a medical controlled, safe manner, as opposed to the old way where we would just let them sleep it off, and sometimes they survived and didn't survive. So this is that collaboration of partnering with the experts in the field and we bring them into our world. I have him working in my jail. And what's awesome about that is as we develop a warm handoff is what we do. So we get them clean, sober, stabilized and stuff. We get them on the drugs that they need to get off of the opiates. And then we hand them off to Ideal Options. And I'm going to read you some statistics since we started this program because we've been doing it for about 4 months. I've had over 800 people come through my jail. So I have a very quick turnaround time in here that have come in with opiate issues. Of those, I've had 322 that have completely gone through the MAP program. And I want you to understand, 322 opiate-addicted people in our community are now heavily engaged in recovery. They not only left the jail after working through our opiate program, the MAP program, but they've actually taken the first step to go over to Ideal Options over in Pasco and made their doctor's appointment to continue their treatment. And I know that doesn't sound like a big deal to you guys, and I'm probably the most excited one about it, but it is absolutely huge for us because I've watched people leave my jail that are, for lack of a better term, jonesing for their opiate fixer, and they'll shoot up right in the parking lot. I mean, that's how fast it is. In jail, we have very strict rules. We control everything. We give them structure, so it's very easy for them to be successful in the jail. The true test is when they walk out that door. When they walk out that door, their friend pulls up and says, let's go get high or whatever, and they make the conscious choice to say, no, I'm going to go see Dr. Jeff over at Ideal Options, and they continue. I want you to know, of those, I've got almost an 80% success rate right now of them leaving our jail and making that first appointment over there. There's nothing that we do that has that kind of thing. I've only had a 9% rate. When we talk about, I have hardliners that tell me that, hey, these are drug addicts, why are you trying to help them and all that? I've only had 9% of all the people that I identify that come into my jail tell me they don't want help. No, thank you. I will continue using drugs and continue down this path. 9%. And of all those people, I've had 112 of them that we put into the MAP program come back into the jail. That sounds kind of alarming, right? Like that's not really a good statistic. Why are you saying that, Sheriff? Because of those 112, there was only 5 new charges. They all had pending charges. They're working off whatever obligation they had to this community and stuff. That is amazing. And stuff. 5 new crimes. That's pretty impressive out of that number. So I wanted to share that with you because we're tracking about 26 different categories to see how successful we are, because we know we're successful initially, but we want to see long term because this isn't a quick fix. This is going to take a year for them to repair the receptor sites, to get back on track and stuff. So they're going to have to spend a lot of time with Dr. Jeff and his staff over there. But we're going to track all that and see where it goes because it's important. We get to see when people start falling off, if they do, and maybe we can tweak, because when we first started this, we were at about 56% success rate of people making appointments. That wasn't good enough for me. I spent time with the staff. I looked at it and go, we need to tweak this. something's not right. And we discovered real quick that we didn't have a real good motivation tool to see, is that person ready for change? Do they want the help? It's a personal contract. It could be something as simple as that. Creating a personal contract between you and them. Making sure they understand the doctor that they meet in here is going to be the doctor they have to go see. And if they don't show up, when they come back to jail, they got to see him, and they let him down and stuff. All those things have contributed and stuff. So I'll challenge my other sheriffs across the state, me and Jim both will, that there's probably not another county in the state that has that kind of success rate and stuff, because we're taking the time and the steps to make sure we turn these people's lives around. So it's critical to us. The second area I wanted to talk to you about is we realize that in this area, detox is paramount. We don't have a detox facility. The last one just shut down over in Pasco again. Law enforcement doesn't use detox. And so we're trying to take a piece of the jail. I had spoken to Jerome, commissioner, and the other commissioners to talk about, can we repurpose like our work release center, a piece of the jail, so that we could turn it into a detox, so that we can take low-level offenders that have committed a very low-level type offense and having a deferment plan. We're working with Andy Miller, the prosecutor, and Mr. Sand, to try to keep a deferment plan, so when police officers come in contact with somebody that's, has an opiate addiction, and they see that it's just manifesting itself, this isn't really a big crime, it's trespassing, it's disorderly conduct, something like that, that normally they would wind up in jail, as she said, 31 times, is that what? 21, sorry. That's I gave an extra 10. So we don't want that. We want to try to take these low-level offenders, instead of us paying to incarcerate them and going through that whole system, let's get them into a treatment program that will turn their life around, get them back into being productive members of society and plug back into their families and stuff. So we're working on the deferment piece. We're working currently with the Department of Health, and we hope that we'll be able to get the licensure point and the regulations and stuff and be able to convert one of those. We're also looking at some other entities within the communities to try to see if we can partner, because I can tell you as a sheriff, I don't want to be in the detox business. I don't want to be in the mental health business, but I have the largest detox and mental health facility in the county, and I think Sheriff Raymond could say the same thing over in his county. So we would love if there's community partners, because there's a lot of experts in this room that are much better at that than we are and stuff. But we're not afraid to take on the challenges in our shop, and we're going to meet that challenge, and we're going to continue to work toward a viable solution with our community partners, with the coalition and stuff, so that we can hopefully put together a detox, kind of an incubator process, and show that it can be successful here. We'll make it successful for law enforcement, so it'll be utilized by law enforcement, and hopefully stay out of the court system and offer people a different path and reduce our recidivism rates in this county, which will help with cost and everything else. So that's all I have for you, and I really appreciate the time, and we're excited about where we're going. And again, thank you, Coalition, for having us here tonight.
Thank you very much for that great news. Our next speaker is Dr. William Waters, psychologist and director of comprehensive health care.
Hello. Tonight I'm going to give you the concept of addiction and what it is and what treatment is. Okay, I'm from Australia, don't be shocked, that's where my accent is from. This example I'm going to give you is not a perfect example, but it's good enough. This is the psychology and this is the neurology. This is how the brain works, okay? But before I explain that, let me tell you about a text that you got today. Or let's say you get this in the morning tomorrow. You're having breakfast, sipping on your juice or tea or coffee, and you pull out your phone, and in big capital letters it says, from one of your friends locally, we need to talk today after lunch, period. Okay, so maybe you kind of gulped a little bit. You read it, you thought, what's this about? You probably started to feel something, think something. Your thoughts were running a little bit in one direction, okay? These are automatic thoughts, and they're very powerful. Maybe breakfast started to feel a little bit differently after that. I mean, how was the rest of your day up until lunch? Some people would be like, wow, they must have exciting news. I can't wait to hear about it. Other people might curl on the ground and become reclusive and what have I done? Some other people might get really angry. Well, I don't know what's going on here. The idea here is that we all have preferences. Our brain develops preferences in the way that we process information. Someone gets excited, another one gets angry. The metaphor that I would like to run with here is that our thoughts, our brains are like mountains and rivers, okay? I don't want to lose you now, otherwise if you don't follow this now, then we're lost for the rest of the evening, okay? So mountains and rivers. Okay, so the Columbia River, it starts in Canada and empties out in the Pacific Ocean between Oregon and Washington. That's where we are. It starts with a mountain, that gets battered by the experiences of life. And then it forms little rivulets as the water comes down. And then it forms little creeks. And then it forms a massive river. The conditions of life hitting the mountain become the thoughts and the emotions that we have. And we begin to favor certain ways of thinking that become these rivers of action, these rivers of thought. You can see that, right? This is a smart group of people. So some people would really favor one way of thinking, and other people another way. But these thinking and coping kind of responses that we develop, they wind around. They take their time to get to where they need to go. They don't just ram up against the wall. The Columbia River, if it started here, it would go all the way to Mexico if it was a straight line. That's how long it is. Yeah, it's crazy long. But it winds around, wisely avoiding barriers, like with our coping mechanisms. When we are confronted in life with difficulties, we choose wise paths to cope with that. Okay, addiction is different. Addiction completely changes the landscape. Addiction doesn't really care about winding around, okay? What addiction does, it gives you the straight path. Okay, you want to empty out into the ocean of tranquility and feel good. The river wants to survive. We want to survive with the difficulties that we're having. We want to cope. We want to get to that ocean of tranquility or safety. Addiction just gets you there right now, right then. There is nothing more significant in changing brain structure than substances, with the exception of brain damage, okay? A brain injury, yeah, of course that's going to make some big differences. But nothing, not even close, comes to addiction. So how do these rivers form? Well, first off, it started with having fun, right? Sometimes we took a drug and the body said, oh, that was pretty good. All right, yeah, that gave me peace. That made me feel decent. And then, some of it's hereditary, and we learn from our parents. Dad had a hard day at work today, so he cracked open a coldie. And I see that's a good way to cope, or I learned on TV, that's a good, they had a hard day, they're going to have a drink. No, that's not the time you have a drink, that's the time you don't. The body remembers, the brain remembers so significantly that, all I need to do is have a little bit of a drink or a little bit of something and I'll feel good. And what happens is our brain begins to make these new connections. Neurons in the brain that connect with one another, they begin to bind with one another over time. And the more and more that are connecting, make bigger and bigger bundles, bigger rivers, bigger flows of neurons, okay? And if you got something that can give you a sense of peace right now without having to wind around for 1,200 miles to get to the ocean, then the brain will say, just take me there now. I'll just take it, okay? So this is the problem with addiction, is that people lose the ability to be able to cope with everyday discomforts, okay? So what they do is, the brain just says, just take the drug. It's easier. The landscape has changed. Even during this talk, some people are thinking, man, I'm bored, And the brain is saying, just take a drug. I want to feel better. It's such a powerful river that almost any discomfort after a while just gets associated with it. Just a little bit of mount pain, mount emotional pain, mount boredom, just kind of brushes up against that whitewater rapid of drug addiction, that river, and it gets sucked in. You imagine putting your hand, your arm into a whitewater rapid, you might get sucked in down the river. And you might not really care about hitting the rocks on the bottom of that river because you know soon you're going to empty out into a nice ocean of tranquility, you know. Any stray thought. So in psychology, sometimes we give people ink blot tests, you know, to see what they're kind of thinking. Just a random picture, and we say, what's this look like, you know? The brain, the addicted brain, what's it see? Oh, it looks like a marijuana leaf. Really? I don't see that. How about this one? Well, that looks like a bottle of bourbon. Okay. Well, how about this one? Well, it looks like a vase. A vase? Yeah, that's where I hide my drugs, you know? Any stray thought, any kind of discomfort, getting up in the morning is enough to use. Okay, rivers and mountains, very powerful. So how do you move a river, right? We've got some engineers in here, I'm sure, probably have an idea. But I'll give you the answer. You get a fishing net. That's how you move a river, right? Okay, probably not. But it works for this, okay? So I'm just going to mix up metaphors a bit. And we're going to move a river with a fishing net, a big, big fishing net. Fortunately, the brain has something called neuroplasticity, and that is that we can make new connections over time. We can create new riverbeds, okay? And the other thing that we need is this net, and I'll talk about that. So one way that we can move this river is with medically assisted treatment, methadone, Suboxone, Subutex, Vivitrol. Imagine for a moment that those thoughts are coming down the mountain. I'm having a hard day. This speech is getting to me. Or like something really bad happened. Or, you know, I've got a discomfort in my back. The thoughts come down the mountain and they're about to enter into that river of action. I'm going to go get high. I'm going to just take a drink, just one. Instead of doing that, instead of going down a river with the medication in a way kind of floods the plain. So instead of it being a river, it's just a big flooded area. So the thoughts come down and they have an option. All of a sudden there's a choice. I don't have to go down the river. I don't have to get high today. I could do something else. All of a sudden there's options. Now there is a problem with this. Once the medication goes away and leaves the system, that old riverbed, it's still there, okay? So they would be the first people to tell you that are providing medication that this is not a one-dose cure. You know, you don't take it once and you're done. Because those riverbeds are still there, those thoughts, those actions. So we need to move the riverbed or create new ones. Okay, so that's where, you know, action comes in. That's where the net comes in. The net is outpatient treatment, inpatient treatment. It is working with an employment specialist. It's working on your self-esteem, going to therapy and working on that trauma. It's learning communication skills and developing new friendships, getting involved in something, spirituality if that's important to you. The idea that it's a net is because each thing strengthens one another. Each strand of the net assists in building some kind of strength. If you go to bed early, you know, get good sleep, then you might be less irritable the next morning. And if you're less irritable the next morning, then you might actually communicate well. And if you communicate well, then you might be able to retain that friend and retain that job. Everything's connected. The other reason why it's a net is because it helps catch cravings as they come through. So, you know, where is the treatment? Formally, sure, outpatient and inpatient medical and behavioral health centers. Informally, AA, NA. You know what would be great? It would be great to see it in the schools. Therapists in every school in the state of Washington, helping build healthy riverbeds before they become, you know, some kind of competition to what might form later when they start using a drug. There are some really big challenges with addiction, even after forming these new ways of thinking and behaving. That old riverbed is still there. There's something called spontaneous recovery in behaviorism. where all of a sudden you can just 10 years later see that little image and all of a sudden you're shaking like you need to get something. It is powerful. I worked in Kentucky for a while, up in the Appalachian Mountains. This was considered the Oxycontin capital of the world. There was not one family that didn't have someone addicted to something, you know. And we had a chief of neurology come and visit us from a big research hospital, one of the leading research hospitals in America. And this is what he said about addiction. You have no comprehension how much the brain changes when drugs get involved. There are millions upon millions of mutations that are happening. Okay? He said that there is nothing harder for the brain to do than give up addiction. Running into a fire to save someone, running out in front of bullets. Those are really hard things. I've never done them. I can't compare. This is a neurologist talking about the brain itself, okay? Just how a brain functions. He said that someone that attempts to give up drugs, neurologically speaking, is a hero. And that is a heroic feat of strength and will. That just blew me away. And we all got pens that said, become a hero, become substance-free at the end. And I thought this was brilliant, okay? I still have the pen, not here. So what can you do in the community? Thank you, appreciate that. I'll be here all night. Okay. No, what can you do to help people with addiction? It is to understand, okay, the mountain, the rivers, the significance of this, to understand the net, and to be part of the net. Be a listening ear. Help them develop their communication skills. Remind them about bed. Help get them to those appointments. They need all those threads for it to really work together. And then remember that there is heroism involved here. All right. I wanted to leave that with you. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great description. I really appreciate that. Our next speaker is Alex Young. And Alex is a supervisor for the Elijah Family Homes Parent-Child Assistance Program.
For those of you that may not know about the Parent-Child Assistance Program, or PCAP, it is a research and social services program created by the University of Washington's Fetal Alcohol and Drug Unit in 1991. We are a program that serves women in addiction that have had substance use during their pregnancies with the aim of preventing future drug-affected births. We take them in when things are raw. They are currently active in their addiction or very new in recovery. New as being as little as 1 day or up to a few months. Let me start by illustrating what this looks like. Imagine with me for a moment a mother of two who's been in and out of the system most of her teen and adult life. She comes from a family affiliated with gang members and where crime is a means of getting by. This woman has gotten caught up in this lifestyle, and the peak of her charges now has a Class B felony. She has no job, is on welfare, and both of her children are in the foster care system. In addition to this, she's in a domestic violence relationship, doesn't have a license or car to get where she needs to go, and overall, she's unmotivated and discouraged by her life circumstances. After extensive CPS involvement, she was referred to our program. We then paired her with a case manager who's been with her through the ups and downs, advocated for her, coached her, encouraged her, and showed her the tools needed to be successful. See, many of the women who come to us don't know where to get started, and I don't blame them because it can be overwhelming and confusing at first. They oftentimes don't know what resources are available, and if they do, they may not have transportation to get there, or they're trying to align their basic needs, and that struggle alone may be enough to keep them busy. Some things I've seen on the women's faces when they first come to our program is fear. Fear of being judged, fear for their children, fear for their life, overwhelm, resistance, and a hard exterior that life has caused them to have. Many of the women in the PCAB program, 90%, have had parents who have used, some even during pregnancy, they themselves were sexually abused as children, were in the welfare system themselves, ran away from home when they were children, didn't finish high school, and have a history of domestic violence. And although these are the characteristics of many of our clients, they aren't of all of them. With the opiate crisis amongst us, we have clients with their bachelor's degree from middle to high income families, with the support system one would need, but they found themselves right alongside others who were introduced to meth and other substances at a very young age. Regardless of their background, it only takes one affected person to start a cycle. And regardless of how they come to us, deep within them they are fragile and stuck in an intergenerational cycle or starting one. But over time, we see this cycle break and help change learned behaviors and make way for healthier childhood for the next generation. Now fast forward today, 1.5 years after the previously mentioned woman has been in our program. As of today, she's been able to complete intensive outpatient, graduate parenting and domestic violence classes, complete a certificate program, have her CPS case closed, and both children returned home to a household that she rents on her own, and she's working full-time training to be a manager. Her case manager let me know today that she actually just opened an escrow account to save to buy her own home. And she has 2.5 years clean time and is paying it forward by telling others about the PCAP program to help them get the help that they need. My point in sharing this real-life story of a Tri-City resident is that there are women and men all around us in our community that are struggling, battling the disease of addiction, trying to overcome barriers created by self and others, stuck in an endless cycle they endured and that their children will endure until someone shows them their worth, empowers them, and stands by their side no matter how many times they mess up. The hallmarks of the PCAP program can be adopted by providers and community members like yourselves by operating with compassion, understanding, and a spirit of teaching self-efficacy through a non-judgmental lens. I really want to drive home the point that although this is a difficult to support population, that with time and continued reinforcement, success is achievable. Change is possible. And our time and effort does pay off. I mentioned earlier that PCAP is a research program. This means we crunch numbers and data from the community we work within and across the state to help drive evidence-based practices and an ability to track trends and changes over time, as well as cost analysis. For example, real-life statistics at the end of the 3-year program are as follows. 60% of our clients have had, in 2018 for PCAP graduates across the state of Washington, 60% have had a mental health connection, 57% have been clean and sober for a year or longer while in the program, and 42% have been abstinent from substances for a minimum of 6 months or longer at the time of graduation. Previous statewide studies within the program have shown increased employment as the main source of income from 6% when they come into the program to 22% at exit, reduced dependence on public assistance, 70% at intake to 25% at exit, and PCAP children have had a shorter length of stay in foster care compared to the Washington state average, 3.8 months versus 20.4 months, which amounted to a savings of $21,231 per child. I share these statistics not to focus on the effectiveness of PCAP, but to share that if we provide ample and necessary support for those struggling with addiction in our community, when done properly, there's a greater return on investment than meets the eye, one that leads to functioning members of society that pour back into our community, one that leads to a better foundation for the next generation, and an investment that lets you know time has been well spent. We don't have the 3-year outcomes within the Tri-Cities at this time, as we're coming up on our 2nd year here, but I do look forward to sharing successes of our community members in more depth in the future. Thank you.
Okay, and then we're just about ready to wrap up our time here, and one last question. The Benton Franklin Coalition is a nonprofit volunteer group. Why are you involved in this group?
Because I believe a recovery is possible, and I love the Tri-Cities, and I want to be part of anything that's going to be bringing recovery to our community.
Because I'm personally an addict in recovery, and if I can reach out and help somebody else where I was at, I think, and we can all just come together.
I'm involved because this is a community problem that touches every one of our families and certainly touches law enforcement. And I realize that we cannot incarcerate our way out of this. We need to bring a coalition together and have the experts in treatment and housing and medical and recovery all work together to find a workable solution for us so that we can stop incarcerating these individuals and get them the help they need so they can truly become productive members of our society again.
That was all on breath. I have a great love of people, and it's traumatic. I've seen what it can do to a community. You can have, just after living up in the mountains, the mining towns of Kentucky, I saw a community in shock and trauma, and it touched me really deeply. And I began to see some of the worry in this community, and I thought I would like to be part of preventing that and helping it not get what I saw.
I think for me, it's that we have to come together as a community and work together. As providers, we can't be doing our work in siloed areas. We have to come together, communicate with one another, work not to repeat our services, but really just strengthen one another and brainstorm with one another, because we all have different perspectives, and we can provide different outlooks and different populations that we work with. And I just think it's great that we can come together and help the community as a whole.
Because Hatcher made me. No, I ditto what's coming down the line here. If we don't begin to think outside of the box, you think we have a problem now? Just wait.
Well, I was born and raised here, and this is my community, so I can only be as healthy as my community is. So I feel very strongly that, we want to stop this from being generational, and we have to stop the cycle now so that we can have a healthy community.
Thank you very much for that. So I'd like to close out our program by introducing our coalition president, Dr. Michelle Gerber, who started all of this, as was mentioned, in her backyard.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you, panelists. What a tremendous evening this has been. I'm blown away. Tri-Cities, you rallied and you're great. This subject is important to our area, and your questions have been instructive to us, knowing what we might do and think about in the future. And the panelists have all helped us to understand better some of the issues and solutions. I know it's late, so I'll be brief. I became interested in substance use disorder or addiction when 2 of my children developed this disease. I knew nothing about this subject, absolutely nothing. And that began 25 years ago when my son began experimenting with drugs at 8th grade at Carmichael Middle School in Richland. In that long span of years, I've learned a lot. My daughter is in very successful long-term recovery, for which I am eternally grateful. And my son died of his addiction in 2014. Having lived all of these experiences, I can tell you some things for sure. Addiction is the perfect storm of a disease. It doesn't fight fair. For a long time, it's sneaky and silent, like an undetected cancerous tumor. And most people don't know they're addicted until long after they are. Addiction changes people such that they don't even recognize themselves, and their families don't recognize them either. And when a person is in active addiction, his or her behavior is often so offensive that it drives people away, the very people who might otherwise help. Most addicted people don't want to be addicted and desperately want to find a way out. But even if they fervently and sincerely want to find a way out, sometimes they can't, because the disease is that powerful. A person can't be scared straight out of addiction and can't be punished into not having the disease of addiction. So addicted people need help. They need medical treatment and safe places to recover, and resources and time and compassion and rest. And we who are not afflicted need to provide these things. It makes sense financially because it will reduce crime and recidivism, homelessness, complicating illnesses that cost more money, and all kinds of burdens on society. But it also makes sense because it is humane and it prevents tragedies. I've lived in the Tri-Cities 32 years, and I know the Tri-Cities can do anything. We built the Cancer Center, the Playground of Dreams, the Reach Museum, and many other things simply because we decided they were worthwhile and they would improve the quality of life. The community rallied, and now we need to do the next good thing and provide services for addicted people. Detox centers, the first one needs to be in the jail, and then we move out from there. And eventually an inpatient treatment facility, an entire recovery center. Together we can do this. So someone asked about what can the community do. I'm going to ask you to do 3 things. First, take the printed 10-point plan that was on most of your chairs. We have more if you don't have it, and implement this in your own life. What you do and you say in your own life can make a difference. Second, let the county commissioners know that you want them to fund a detox center. On a little card is all of their emails, just for your convenience. So get ready, Jerome. And third, I need you to donate to our coalition. We have no source of income except donations. We're all volunteers. We receive no pay. In fact, it costs us money, most of us, to do this work. And we just need to stay alive as an organization so we can continue, so we can advocate, we can hold forums, we can do all kinds of programs that we'd like to do. We have a donation basket on the back table, or you can go to our website and donate online. If you're a business, you can sponsor an activity that we'd like to do. And everything you give is tax deductible because we are a tax deductible registered organization. Our treasurer, Janet White, has forms on the table by the door for those donations that are very big. She can give you a receipt. So, and if you want to join the coalition, sign up on the back table. We'd love to have you. We will put you to work. It doesn't come easy. We'll have to join a committee and do some work. Thank you for coming. Feel free to mingle with the panelists. And how about one more round of applause for the panel?